Vladimir Zelensky just put out a tweet today. I'm going to read it to you, but it shows that all that reporting on Zelensky firing Zaluzhnyi was not just rumor, and that the people who are going after those Western reporters for using all those anonymous sources for anonymous sources probably have to eat a little crow. Not saying that the anonymous sources 100% prove it, but the ones that said, oh, this is all nonsense and propaganda and believe the MOD overall else, they're gonna have to eat a little crow. Let me read this. I met with General Valery Zaluzhnyi. I thanked him for the 2 years of defending Ukraine. We discussed the renewal that the armed forces of Ukraine require. We also discussed who could be part of the renewed leadership of the armed forces of Ukraine. The time for a renewal is now. I proposed to General Zaluzhnyi to remain part of my team. As far the rumor was that he turned it down. We will definitely win. Glory to Ukraine. Flag, flag, flag. So apparently, well, but before we get into him getting replaced, the first thing I want to say is this shows that you shouldn't just choose your sources based upon what you want to hear. Zaluzhnyi has an 88% trust rating in Ukrainian society. Western leaders tend to respect him. He has a lot of respect in the military community. He is not viewed the same way that someone like Shoigu or Gerasimov or any of these pencil pushers are viewed. Gerasimov less so, but Shoigu definitely. He is viewed as somebody with military competence, experience, and being in his 50s, even though that seems old, that is quite young for being a 4-star general. But he was able to manage a lot, including the defense of Kiev, the Kharkiv counteroffensive, which was success. It showed that the Ukrainians couldn't conduct large-scale counteroffensives. It scared the Russians so much, they said that NATO super soldiers took part to try to degrade the Ukrainians that succeeded, and the Kherson counteroffensive. He did also help manage the Zaporizhia counteroffensive, which did not end with a breakthrough, and of course was probably an issue of great division within the Ukrainian government, and is part of the rumors as to why they're starting to split somewhat. But point is, Zaluzhny's fired. Why was he fired? Well, it's hard to say, and this is going to be the main thing I say here, because this needs to be emphasized 10, 20, 30 times. We're talking about a war here. The information is of a national security importance. The survival of the state is at stake with the information that Zelensky and Zaluzhnyi discusses. So a lot of the information that probably led to this decision, we are just not going to have access to, and we won't have access to probably until either the war's over or way into the future. Way into the future. And depending upon their relationship with Russia moving forward, or what Zaluzhnyi might do in the future, we might not even know until way after the war's over. So, as of right now, we don't know. Now, there has been some speculation. One area of speculation is that Zelensky, from the reports indicating, from the reports that we've been reading, wants less military recruitment than Zaluzhnyi does. Zelensky is leaning towards a state administrator perspective of how much would this cost the state? Could we sustain this? Definitely with Western aid starting to dry up, an increase of over 509,000 more soldiers would be very difficult, even if we need to replace all these soldiers who have been fighting for so long who need to rest, and we need soldiers to be able to go home to their families, and we need replacements. $20.
Keep up your important work.
Thank you so much for the $20 of Valkyrie. I really appreciate that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But on Zaluzhny's side, if you want to hold the line, if you want to keep the front line staffed, if you want to make new units and replace those who need to be rotated out, let alone, again, make the new units, you're going to need a lot of men. And considering they're fighting the Russian Federation, who could soon, after the elections, possibly mobilize even more people as they engage in shadow mobilization, they do need a lot of men. But that was one divide that is hinted at. Another, and this is pure speculation, I saw they had an analyst on DW this morning who said that this is what he believed. So there are at least some people who believe it, but I don't know how much I believe it. If you look at the trustworthiness rate between Zaluzhny and Zelensky, they're both very popular. So popular that American politicians would kill to have the level of popularity. Zelensky has a 62% approval rating. That is pretty good. That's pretty good. And you want to know, even the people who don't necessarily approve of his leadership or would want something else are also people who would say, like, they respect the fact that he stayed or they have some other way. Like, Zelensky has a lot of credibility in society. Doesn't mean it's endless. There is some political division between Klitschko and him. There are opposition parties in Ukraine. There are people who disagree with some decisions that he's made. But Zaluzhny's on another level. Zaluzhny has an 88% approval rating. Well, it's not approval. It's like a trust rating. Talking about trust ratings here.
Conchia 430 has donated $5. Love the channel. Random fun question. What's your favorite Ukrainian food?
My favorite Ukrainian food? I like the tiny little circular cheesecakes. Those are beautiful, and I love borscht. I'm a simple man. But Sam's Steakhouse in Kiev, good steak. I'm a steak man. I judge a country by its steak, by its steaks, how good they are. Go to Sam's Steakhouse in Kiev. I recommend it highly. Anyway, those are some of the reasons as to why Zaluzhny might be going. But again, he's highly respected, Zaluzhny. He's respected in the West. He's respected amongst the rank and file. In fact, I mean, what was that one song? Oh my gosh. You know, we're on YouTube, and I don't want to get the copyright strike, but I don't know if this would be copyright struck. So let me look. Here it is. There's a song. Here it is. I'll play like 30 seconds because that's like the copyright limit. Look at this. Wait, let me just speed forward to the lyrics.
Золото ланів, синє небо в наших прапорах і серцях. Нам чужого поля не треба, за своє б'ємось до кінця. Наступ наш ніхто не зупинить, крізь вогонь ідем до мети. Звільнимо свою Україну, ворогам зламаєм хребти. Всі в родині дружні, ти і він, і я. Батько наш Залужний, ЗСУ сім'я.
I mean, Zaluzhny he's very popular. The rank and file respect him. Every time I ask every soldier about him, they like him. So he's popular. He's well respected in the West. He's well respected by military experts. And sometimes it's even to the point of bafflement at the amount of skill he has as somebody in his 50s when 4-star generals are usually in his 60s, right? And he's the only person in Europe who has the experience he has fighting the war that he's fighting in the position that he's fighting it in. Because he's the only person who's been leading the Ukrainian armed forces for the entirety of this war as he was appointed in late 2021 to the position. So, him being removed is a significant change. Now, whatever truly motivated it, we will probably not know until after. But let me be honest with you. There are concerns about his replacement. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you what the Russians are saying, because what the Russians are saying is ridiculous, and I just want to, if you've heard this type of stuff, I want to dismiss it immediately. So this is from a Russian Telegram channel, and this is the type of narratives I'm seeing. Zaluzhny resigns. This is rather good for Russia. Remember how many did not believe that a conflict between Zelensky and Zaluzhny was really brewing? Now he has already matured, broken through, and will give through the consequences. Of course, we expect an armed coup from Zaluzhny and subsequent capitulation. This is much more interesting than going to London and criticizing the current Kiev government from there. However, Zaluzhny can also surrender. Okay, so Zaluzhny's not doing a coup. Zaluzhny, as far as everything I know, does generally want Ukraine to win, and he would be smart enough to know that not only would such a coup, there's a good chance it would not be successful, as people would be scared of breaking down society, but it could give an advantage to the Russians. And if the government in Kiev falls, and he is what represents that government, that puts him, all of his allies, everything in danger. So I don't think he's going to be doing that. We have no rumbles of him doing that. And Zaluzhny kind of stepped down quietly. And he didn't thrash much publicly when Zelensky, criticized certain things. So I just don't have any reason. I know he's he's not a pushover, but we have no reason to believe he's going to do this. So let's get that straight out of the way. But let's talk about his replacement. Now, there's already going to be some difficulties, no matter what, in replacing the command like this. You got to build up your trust with the average soldiers. You know, I mean, Zaluzhnyi had a level of trust that many leaders would kill for. So that's something you need to deal with. And of course, when Zaluzhnyi goes, it's not just Zaluzhnyi that goes, a bunch of other command goes. And Zelensky said this in his interview with Italian TV, that when he was getting the public prepared for this, and he was saying, yes, Zaluzhnyi, we're considering getting rid of Zaluzhnyi. He was also saying other leadership as well, because Zaluzhny's staff is probably going to be replaced if they want a fresh start, quote unquote, which seems to be the Ukrainian government's perspective. And that's going to take time for that new, leadership to get adjusted into the position, to, learn the ropes, all that stuff. So there's going to be problems no matter what. But the person that Zelensky is replacing Zaluzhnyi with, the guy by the name of Syrskyi. Now, Syrskyi, and I said if this was to happen, it was going to be one of two people. I said Budyov or Syrskyi. And I said of Budyov and Syrskyi, I said that Syrskyi was more likely, even though Budyov might be a Zelensky ally. And the reason why is because Budyov does not have any experience commanding traditional ground forces in the way Syrskyi and Zelensky has. But the other option was Syrskyi. And so Syrskyi is now the leader of the Ukrainian armed forces. He's their chief of staff. Now, Syrskyi used to be the head of the Ukrainian armed forces before this, and many people will say that the decision to stay in Bakhmut was his decision. Decision to stay there, fight, and hold it, and to rededicate more troops, which some Western leaders say could have been dedicated to the counteroffensive. But of course, I'm not a military strategist. I'm not going to argue the specifics, because I am not going to degrade the tradition of military strategy in that way, right? I'm not going to do that. But that was one divide on Syrskyi. And the reputation of Syrskyi, now whether it's deserved or not, is up to the soldiers and those with a direct experience in working with him to say. He has gotten a reputation for being a lot more careless with soldiers than Zaluzhnyi, with some people just straight up referring to him as the butcher. The idea being that Syrskyi might be of that old Soviet school that is objectives focused, and where someone like Zaluzhnyi might husband their resources and cares about the troops, Syrskyi is somebody who's like, we need to take that city, someone take that city, charge. And I'm not saying that is what Syrskyi is. That's the narrative, at least. Now, is this true? Now, I want to throw out a few things. The first thing I want to throw out is military leaders have been referred to as butchers before, and as somebody who is like hard on the men and sends them in the battle aggressively. You want to know who else has been known as a butcher? General Grant. You know who else was known as a butcher? Patton. They were also known as butchers. You want to know who was known as somebody who cared deeply about the troops and loved them? General McClellan. Now, I'm not saying that Syrskyi is Grant, okay? Grant was a brilliant military strategist. So was Patton. I'm not saying that. I don't know that. But what I'm saying is being more willing to risk higher casualties does not necessarily mean you're not a good military commander. But if Ukraine is going to engage in a period of active defense, as many military experts have been suggesting, strategy experts, there's been a lot of great articles talking about active defense being the way forward. And with the big fortifications that are being invested into, it seems that that's the path. Is Syrskyi the person for that? That's the question people are asking. Or is there going to be a reversal? We don't know. We got to wait until Syrskyi gets into his position, adjusts. And that's the number one thing I would say is wait. Because we've seen Syrskyi as head of the ground forces. We've seen Syrskyi as being somebody who helped to manage the Battle of Bakhmut and was a decision maker there. We haven't seen Syrskyi as somebody in the position that Zaluzhnyi has, surrounded by his, I don't want to use the word lackeys, but lackeys. So we don't know how he's going to specifically behave yet until we see how it goes. But he doesn't have a good representation, a good reputation amongst the common soldiers. And that is going to be one of the main things he has to address. Because I'm talking to people in Ukraine, and I cannot find anyone that is telling me that this is a good decision. And I mean that. I can't find anyone. Now, let me be clear. I've heard from other Western journalists that I know that if you talk to the higher ranking general corps of the armed forces, then the reputation of Syrskyi starts to change. Then the reputation of Syrskyi, he's strict, he's a tough guy, but he knows what he's doing, and that there's no one, and this is probably true, that there's no one as experienced as Syrskyi. But I don't think that's exactly true. There are other experienced people, but on the level that Syrskyi is, when it comes to how high ranking he is and how involved he was in the decision-making process, he is one of the few people that could replace him. Man. Again, the higher ranking people, they might have more respect for him. The lower ranking people have nearly really not any respect for him. And I think that's going to be one of the main obstacles he's going to have in this transition, is trying to earn the respect of the common soldier and make it so that they trust him in the way that it's going to be nearly impossible to get the trust in the way Zaluzhnyi had, but some level of trust. I think that doesn't mean that he has to have a lovey-dovey relationship with each soldier. This isn't like, summer camp. This is a war, but that is something that needs to be addressed. That is definitely something that needs to be addressed. Okay, anybody have any questions about this? Because I think I've said everything that I want to say. We could read this article about Syrskyi. Might as well get to know him a little bit. General Alexander, wait, let's get the look at him, okay? I'm used to Zaluzhny's image in my head. I gotta look at him for a second. Okay, so this is Syrskyi, huh? This is the guy? So that's the hat he's going with, huh? Okay, I've already found a disagreement. But, keep going. General Alexander Syrskyi, who appointed commander of the Ukrainian military on Thursday, led 2 successful counteroffensives in the war against Russian troops before his troops became bogged down one of the most contentious and costly battles of the conflict. It is true that in those counteroffensives as well, the ones that did succeed, Syrskyi was there. Now it's disputed what amount of that battle was due to Syrskyi's leadership and what amount of that success was due to other people's leadership. This is disputed, of course, because I've talked to soldiers and they'll dispute amongst their different units who did what, this did that, and actually we won. I remember I was talking to Kraken and they're really talking up we took this, took that. Then I go to International Legion and hey, he didn't mention we did this, we did that before they did that. And so a lot of that is also probably true when talking about command. It was a strung out, vicious spell of urban combat in the eastern city of Bakhmut last winter. And even as Ukraine was clearly losing ground in the fight, Syrskyi, then commander of the ground forces, had argued that the decision to defend was sound since Russia was losing more soldiers than Ukraine. Ukraine maintained what military parlance called a favorable attrition ratio in the Bakhmut street fighting. That is true, but the question is, was it favorable enough in comparison to, for example, the Avdiivka losses? Well, now it's different because it's street-by-street fighting, but what it was when they were going through that valley of death. Because it can't just be that they've got a positive attrition ratio, because if they lose 1 soldier for every 1.5 Russians, that's still not enough. It has to be near 1 to every 3, 3 Russians for every 1 Ukrainian. Where were we? But it did little to win backers for the general strategy among rank-and-file soldiers. Oh yeah, let me read it again. Ukraine maintained what military parlance calls a favorable attrition ratio in Bakhmut street fighting, but it did little to win backers for the general strategy among rank-and-file soldiers. Bakhmut ultimately fell after Ukraine had lost thousands of troops in the grinding fight. The nickname of the Butcher for General Syrskyi is now widespread in Ukraine's army. In the 2 earlier successful battles in the defense of the capital in Kiev and in the northern Kharkiv region, Syrskyi soldiers had turned to small unit tactics and rapid maneuvers to defeat the larger, better armed Russian forces. But it was his willingness to engage in attritional warfare over Bakhmut, however much the ratio of losses favored Ukraine, that drew criticism from the United States and that has hung over the general's reputation in the Ukrainian army. General Syrskyi is assuming command of the military after the front line has hardened, as rapid advances by Ukraine's troops seem a distant prospect amid deep uncertainty over the future of military aid from the country's most important ally, the United States, as plans to mobilize more soldiers in Ukraine has stalled, complicating military planning. How the general prosecutes the 2-year-old war against Russia's invasion will, in large part, be beyond his control, resting on what Western weaponry and new manpower will be at his disposal. Still, Director of the Ukrainian Army Conservation and Disarmament Center, a military research organization in Kiev, said President Vladimir Zelensky's appointment to replace Zaluzhnyi signaled a focus on ground combat. Ukraine must risk in advance and the cost in lives and equipment, said, or be forced into a negotiation for a ceasefire and settlement on unfavorable terms. But this suggests that they're going to try a large-scale offensives in 2024? So when they say, well, that would be maybe not large-scale offensive, maybe they mean a really active defense. When asked if the Pentagon had made contact with the new Ukrainian military chief, Brigadier General Pat Ryder, the Pentagon's press secretary, said Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin had not spoken to Syrskyi. One thing that won't change, he added, is our continued support for Ukraine in their efforts to defend themselves against Russian aggression. Syrskyi, who will take command of Ukraine's forces in the largest war in Europe since World War II, was schooled in an elite military academy in Moscow before the collapse of the Soviet Union and has spent much of his career fighting the Russians. He is intimately familiar with the tactics of the country's enemy. He began his career in the Soviet military in 1986. After joining the army of the newly independent Ukraine in 1991, he gradually climbed the ranks into the ranks of command. Between 2007 and 2014, he occupied several high-profile positions in general staff, and after Russia illegally annexed Crimea and fomented a war in eastern Ukraine a decade ago, he was appointed as deputy commander of the anti-terrorist operation, placing him in direct combat with Russian forces. In 2019, he became head of Ukraine's ground forces, the post he held until his promotion on Thursday. Complicating his command is the fact that he has taken a job vacated by a general who is well regarded by the army and broader society in what is widely perceived as a politicized shakeup of Ukraine's military leadership. Some soldiers and junior commanders in Ukraine's military view Syrskyi as a holdover from an older generation and say his embrace of head-on fight in Bakhmut showed that he was pursuing bloody Soviet-style military tactics against an enemy doing the same. A Ukrainian platoon commander who had been fighting in the east on and off since 2014 and under General Syrskyi since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022 said that the general had shown little willingness to adapt as new tactics and new technologies have appeared on the battlefield. He spoke on the condition of anonymity because he was not permitted to speak. But the general has supporters. The battle for Bakhmut also enforced his reputation as a strong commander who leaves emotions aside, some say. Syrskyi, said Hanna Mailer, a former Ukrainian defense minister, has vast combat experience in this war. Okay, but that didn't disprove any that's like a totally different. What? Okay. Well, I mean, he has experience, that is true. He has worked closely with NATO on programs to modernize the army, beginning in 2013. And in the battles to rebuff the attack on Kiev and clear out the Russian forces from the Kharkiv region, he relied not on head-to-head infantry warfare, but on trickery and rapid maneuvers by small units. That's true, but isn't it disputed how much of an like, I know it was the ground forces, but I've heard some people try to dispute how much of that was him and how much of that was the people on the ground. How much of that was his decision and how much of it was people kind of just ad hoc figuring it out as the Russian line collapsed, which wasn't expected. But I don't know. He was in command, so you got to give him some credit. Syrskyi commanded troops fighting against Russian forces and their separate proxies in the Donbass region starting in 2014. He directed the Ukrainian retreat there from the city of Dobrovolsk in 2015, which taught the military a bitter lesson about negotiated ceasefires. In that battle, thousands of Ukrainian troops were partly surrounded, which had advanced close enough the single access road to the city to open fire directly with tanks. To save the soldiers, Ukraine made political concessions in Minsk II agreement in exchange for a ceasefire deal that Russia broke within days. Rather than surrender, Syrskyi ordered soldiers to retreat at night under fire, and more than 100 were killed in a harrowing dash over farm fields to reach Ukrainian lines. In the current full-scale war, Syrskyi has shown he can fight despite lack of equipment and forces. In Kiev, he commanded lightly armed troops fighting on cities' outskirts, supported mostly by Ukraine's Soviet legacy artillery system. General Syrskyi won the top military position over a man considered his main competitor for the job, the commander of the military intelligence agency, Kyrylo Budanov, who had overseen a campaign of sabotage and drone strikes behind enemy lines. These operations are asymmetrical, seeking to harm Russia using innovative tactics and technology such as drones that outweigh Moscow's superior quantity of men and weapons. Zelensky has no choice but to take any possible steps which will allow Ukraine to win, Mr. Samus, the military analyst, said. To base your military decisions on the people's love is a mistake. That's true. If there was a decision that Zaluzhnyi didn't want to make because it was unpopular, then I would say, okay, that makes sense. But what decision would that be? Does he not want to engage in large-scale offensives? And there's a good reason not to engage in large-scale offensive right now, considering, well, the ammunition shortage. So what do they want to do? Something new, something surprising? I don't know what that... I guess it is wrong to do that, but was the people's love placed mistakenly? Anyway, I guess we'll find out.